Good evening and welcome to the Laughing Monkey Music Show. Today we have on Mike. Mike, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. Slow beginning now. Now, I've come across your stuff. You have some podcasts. You've been a tour manager, a DJ. You work on a book. You have a vast amount of knowledge and stories and experience from the 70s, 80s, into the 90s, probably is your career that you're kind of putting out in different
Yeah.
versions and different formats in the multimedia verse at this point. And I came across you on Instagram, which led me back to your YouTube page and all your rock and roll stories with Motley Crue and LA Guns. And really all that content is just kind of a precursor to some of the projects you can be working on. But could we step back a little bit and maybe do a little brief mini intro so people get an idea of what your background is, sort of?
Sure. I started out as a disco DJ in nightclubs in the late '70s in New York in the Queens area, and that led me to anything I've done from that point on. Started from being a DJ. Disco kind of faded out, and then the post-punk and new wave scene really started exploding, and there were clubs on Long Island that held 2,500, 3,000 people. Big clubs. I started working in those clubs. I met more people at more record companies, which led to other things. I at the same time that I was DJing in '79, I started working for a record distributor. A record distributor distributes product to the stores across the country. This one focused on import music. I started working there at the same time I was a DJ. I started meeting a lot of bands and getting more record company connections, which led me to eventually I was the director of promotions for Relativity Records in 1987 with acts like Joe Satriani, and a big radio record they had was a band called the Brandos, and they had tons of stuff. Scruffy the Cat. They also had the Combat label with all the thrash stuff.
Yep. Remember Two Bit Thief? I think they were on the label too at the time.
Two Bit Thief, yeah, that I remember that. That was on the label. The Combat stuff, the metal stuff, did better than anything. I mean, Exodus and Megadeth and Possessed and Death and all those bands. They sold really well. More so, the only real Relativity stuff that sold in numbers was Satriani and Vi when that kind of thing started happening. But prior to that, they didn't really sell. They were Relativity had indie stuff. Thelonious Monster, and they licensed records from different labels in England. They did Nicky Sudden records and Cocteau Twins and all this kind of like college radio stuff, but it didn't really sell a lot. The metal stuff sold. That's what paid the bills, But anyway, so I got a little off track, but all of those things led me to I eventually working with LA Guns in '88, and then I did that for a year, and then I came off the road and got back into the nightclub world, and I was working at Limelight in Manhattan for about 7 years, every Sunday, Rock and Roll Church. And then, that kind of petered out in the mid to late '90s when the mayor of New York cracked down on all the clubs and put everybody out of business, and that was the end, really, and it never came back. There's never been a big club scene in New York City since. So it was a magical time. '70s all the way through like the early '90s. It was great, and for me. And then everything petered out. Napster, and there you go. It all started going downhill.
It has, and people have listened to my show have heard me talk about my own effects of it. But one of the things really great I want to tell people that may not be aware, when you're DJing is like talking with like crates of vinyl. And you talked about this on your show, and I was aware of this. You had to go out and get the latest records. You had to be on it. It was not like just downloading. You weren't. It wasn't like these live shows nowadays. You have to bring your laptop and you get canceled. This is the real deal. There's no phones. There's no nothing. It's getting vinyl. It's being on top of the system, knowing rolling up your sleeves. That's what it was like.
Yeah,
and
it was a different animal.
It was a lot harder than what it is now.
Yeah, I mean, now guys, they have this technology where you can still DJ with records, but you don't take the record off. It's the same record. It never leaves the turntable. And all it does is give you a connection to the files on your computer. So you can technically still spin, but you're not whipping off a record and digging through a crate and finding a record. You've got to be on top of your game. You just can't throw on anything. So you've got to really know what to play and when to play it. And you don't want to play the same things every week. So you're constantly mixing in new stuff. You had to be on top of your game. If you didn't have a copy of a vinyl record that weekend, you didn't have it. You were odd man out. You weren't on top of your game. You had to have the record. You had to get a copy from somewhere. So it was a constant search for that. And it keeps you on your toes, and it separated, the real craftsman to me from the just schlocky whatever. I'll throw on anything. To work in a club that held 3,000 people is a lot of pressure. So you had to be good, and you had to be on top of your music, or else they, find somebody else.
It's like boxing. You're as good as your last fight. That's it.
Exactly. There were great nights, there were good nights, and there were bad nights. I mean, not every night was great as far as being in the moment and doing the right thing and playing the right records. It was a tough thing. And you didn't get paid very much, and you worked for 8 hours and hot, humid, smoky. Everyone was smoking cigarettes back then. I mean, it was not good conditions, but I loved it. So I would have done it for free, honestly. But everything I have ever done in music started from being a DJ in a nightclub. I mean, it sounds crazy, but that's how it all started.
Yeah. But it's important that people see the difference of the vinyl, the digging, the adventure of finding the right songs, getting the right imports. It's the whole process. It's not even the end product is a reward, but there's so much else involved in it, which I noticed with a lot of the work you've done. You do a lot of on the journey process work and prep work for the big payoff for like a lot of the stuff you've done. That's how I feel listening to you talk. Even with you preparing to become working with LA Guns, all the stuff you're doing day to day is keeping them going. It leads, you're really just kind of keeping the machine going. Because your personality.
Yeah.
So to me, I think that's how you've grown.
Yeah, I've always been, I just have a good ear. I always had a good ear for songs and music and picking hit stuff. And it was a thing where, if you jumped on a record early and you were reporting that record as your number one record to Rock Pool and the radio stations and Billboard and all these things, record company people would be all over you. Hey, number one, that's awesome. What can I do for you? So it was a lot of that. You want to call it payola or whatever, but I didn't care about. I would not play a record unless it was great and it fit what I was doing, no matter how much they would pressure you. So finding those songs, picking those records. I can remember playing test pressings of like Depeche Mode things and stuff that no one had, and import stuff that nobody had. And I also subscribed. There used to be a company called Disconnect. You had to be a member, and they only had I don't know 100 slots. So you had to be one of those 100. You had to be really good, and you paid for this service. But what they would do was they would take hot songs and remix them and only press 100 copies. So if you had one of those 100 copies, you had something that only 100 people in the world had. So It was, and not all the remixes were great. I mean, there was a great couple that I still have copies of them that, no one could buy them. They weren't on the radio. You couldn't buy it. It was only 100 copies pressed for DJs. So that was it was all about, was separating yourself. And you only got there from being really aggressive and being on top of it and, bugging guys at record stores. So, or record company people would hook you up with stuff, but that's really, it's a lost art now. Anybody can have anything at the fingertips. So it just takes the fun out of it to me, and the exploration and the digging. That was the fun. I have a record no one else in New York has. I mean, of a hot song, a mix of a hot song that nobody has. And that's what separated you, really.
It was the hustle you did. And So it doesn't surprise me, but how did you make the transition? Because I know you've talked about seeing some great shows in New Haven. I'm in Connecticut, so I've seen a lot of the same shows you were talking about in New Haven, like the Molly Crew shows and these and that. Were you based out like were you like in New Jersey? Like how did you end up getting to also like be like become like the manager for LA Guns from from doing what you did? Like how did that transition over like your skill set? That's kind of interesting to me.
Well,
You know?
I the yeah, well, how that all happened was I was um I was based out of I lived close to Kennedy Airport, which is in Queens, New
Okay.
York, and it's right on the border of Nassau County. So he's Queens, and then the first county, Western County in Long Island, is Nassau, and then the second county is Suffolk, goes out east. So I lived right on the border of Nassau County and Queens. I mean, going to New Haven was 2.5 hours. That was nothing.
Mhm.
You drive to Philadelphia, it was 2 hours. So if you were into a band and somebody's going, yeah, and give you tickets and passes to a show, and we were crazy Motley Crue fans, we were there. I mean, we would drive 2.5 hours. We didn't care. It was like Motley
Yeah.
Crue. So you just did it. But through working at Relativity Records in '87, let me back up a minute. I was
Oh
in
yeah.
a short lived band with Kelly Nichols um, on Combat Records, and it was that whole story is a that's a episode unto itself because there's a lot of story, a lot
What
of
was it? What band
background
was it?
info. It was
What
Sweet
band was it
Pain.
in? You were in Sweet Pain? I was asking him about it the other day
Yeah,
when I was talking to him. That's awesome.
yeah. That was that whole story is a whole nother thing. But anyway, so I had gotten Kelly Nichols into that band when Kelly was a roadie. Kelly was a roadie for a cover band on Long Island that did all new wave cover songs. Um, and two of the guys in that band ended up forming Danger Danger. So so Kelly was the roadie, and then I had the ability to put this band and record together for Combat. And I said, I got to get Kelly in the band because he was playing bass and he was trying to get into a band. So I got Kelly in the band. It didn't last very long. He eventually went out to LA and joined Faster Pussycat, and then he was in a motorcycle accident, and then he got into LA Guns and blah blah blah. But in '87, I was working for Relativity Records, and I would be out in LA like once a month on business. So every time I'd go to LA, I'd hook up with Kelly, and then he introduced me to Mick Cripps, and then eventually Tracy and everybody else. And
Okay.
so every time I would go there, those guys had no money. They had a record deal. They were making their album. They had no money. Their bills were paid, but they had no pocket cash. So I'd come to LA with an expense account and just take those guys out to dinner and drinks. And after doing that for like, I don't know, 6 months, I got a call one day toward the end of '87 from Kelly and Mick asking me if I wanted to be their road manager. I'd never been a road manager before, but I took really good care of those guys when I would come out every month. Plus, I kind of grew up on the street kind of, so I knew how to handle things and take care of myself, and take care of other
Right.
people. So they were like, man, this guy's going to take great care of us. And their manager at the time was not a big time manager or anything. He managed the band, he got them their record deal, and he helped them through all that formative year of '87. But when it came time to dealing with Polygram, he really didn't know the business. He wasn't a big business manager. Like a guy that he wasn't Lieber Krebs or one of these big management companies. He was in over his head. So part of the attraction for them also was that I had all this input and info and connections with radio all over the country and publicists and all this stuff. So I kind of helped with that. That was part of it. And the other part was I took care of these guys really well when I would visit. So they're like, you got to be our road manager. At the same time, I got an offer from Atlantic Records to come run their heavy metal department. And I had been sitting in a cubicle at Relativity, and I was just trying to get away from that record company cubicle life. I'd just gotten bored with it. And then they offered me to say, come be our road manager. And I did that for a year. And part of the reason I can remember a lot is I wrote stuff down, but I also wasn't a 25-year road guy that burned out, and you can't remember anything because it just all bleeds into each other. I did it for a year and was able to reflect back and look at my journals and notes, and that's how I know all this stuff, because it wasn't my career move to be a roadie or anything, you know. So that's kind of like how that happened with LA Guns. You know, it was I just I took care of them really well when I was out in LA, and they're like, we need this guy in the roadways.
Well, that makes sense
And
now.
that's what I
You
did.
you share that. Thank you. What were the day to day to be a manager, like a road manager? Like, for people that don't know, what was it like back then as a road manager that you had to? Because I know you have lot of things, crazy things you put together, but what would day to day look like a little bit for you?
It was, you know, it was you have to just forget about being a road manager and just think back to 1988. So there's no computers, there's no cell phones, there's no GPS, there's no Venmo, no one had debit cards, so everything was cash. You're traveling across the country on a bus with a paper map, and I had rolls of quarters at all times, 20, 30 rolls of quarters for phones, because you had to call LA all the time to the office. um, and you really were out there like pirates, like, I mean, it was the day to day was just there was really no, pattern. You'd think you would have a plan, but it would get thrown out the window usually right away, because there was always something going on. But it was, and plus the management was not as organized for LA Guns, which made my job more difficult. Whether it was financially and the finances of things, or just organization, they didn't have a big booking agent, which made things
Hmm.
difficult, because if you're booked by the same people that book AC/DC and Cinderella and Kiss, no one's going to mess with you. You're going to go to the
Right.
club, you're going to get paid, and you're going to leave. We had no one else on our booking roster. The only artist they had of any merit was this guy Charlie Sexton, and
Oh, wow.
and it's like, so if they didn't want to pay us for whatever reason, or didn't want to pay us our bonus, well, we won't get the Charlie Sexton gig. They don't care. They didn't want Charlie Sexton anyway. So we got screwed with a lot financially. We always got paid, but it was, you got into situations that you hope you would get out of, because somebody didn't want to pay you, and you didn't have a big agency behind you for the muscle. You were kind of screwed. But it was, it was a gig to gig, hotel to hotel. you know um I talk about a lot of this stuff in my videos on YouTube. I tell some stories. I mean, it was very stressful. um uh you know there's a lot of tension between, you had three guys that had never toured before, and then you had Steve Riley, who had been in Wasp. He had, I think, three major label record deals before he even joined LA Guns. The guy was very seasoned. He was older than them by 6, 7 years. And, he wanted things a certain way. The other guys could care less. If you said, look, there's no hotels all week, you were sleeping on the bus, great, they wouldn't care. But Steve was like, no. He had to have hotels, and decent hotels, and move his room 10 times because it's too noisy. It was a lot of tension with that. I'm about to I haven't done a YouTube video in a while, but I'm about to do one soon about the whole how LA Guns started falling apart, and the fights and the arguments, and how it all fell apart. So a lot of it was just tension from day one. I mean, Steve got in the band because he didn't have a gig, and he convinced Tracy that you don't need the drummer you have. The drummer you have, which was Nicky Alexander, Nicky Beat, the drummer you have is a punk rock drummer. You're never going to make it with a punk rock drummer. You need a real pro drummer like me. And that's how Steve got in the band. And they threw Nicky Beat out. He's on the first record, but his picture's not on the album, but he played on it.
Right.
And Steve's picture's on the album. And then, so that's how it all started. So, you know, eh, Steve is a great drummer. He's really good. But by that one move, LA Guns used to be like a harder edged Lords of the New Church. They were much more alternative and punky sounding and rough and
Yeah.
raw. And then they get Steve Riley, double bass drums, and like that, they became a heavy metal band, like that. So it's I always compare it to when Peter Criss left Kiss and they got Eric Carr. Different kinds of drummers. One's a
Hmm.
heavy metal, heavy pounder, and Peter Criss was kind of like studied with Gene Krupa.
Jazz.
So
Yeah.
jazz, right? So changed the sound of the band. Steve Riley changed the sound of the band for LA Guns, and they when I first saw LA Guns, Steve wasn't in the band, and they were like much more. I don't want to say they were like Guns N' Roses, but they were much more in that vein. And then once Steve joined, Steve and Tracy always wanted to be Led Zeppelin, and that whole, thing. And I mean, which kind of, there's songs on Cocked and Loaded and the Hollywood Vampires that have that Zeppelin thing to them,
Oh yeah.
the galloping Bonham type drums and all that stuff. That first LA Guns record is that's the sound and the look of the band that got the record deal. And it was never the same once Steve joined. Yes, they might not have ever gotten to, I mean, they had a top 40 hit with Ballad of Jane, but they might not have ever gotten to that point without Steve, because Steve handled a lot of the business. Steve handled all the business, really, because no one else wanted to do it. So Steve was experienced. He handled the business. And through all that, he got more powerful and more powerful. Got rid of the first manager, got rid of the first booking agent. They signed with Alan Kovac, who now manages Motley Crue, and they got bigger booking agency. And Steve slowly started taking control of the band, which he did.
Yeah.
But no one stopped him, because no one wanted to deal with any of the business. So, that's how you got to LA Guns. That's how there was this who owns the rights and who owns the name. And, while everybody else was screwing around, Steve's filing forms and papers. You know what I mean? So it's unfortunate. I don't have anything against any of those guys. I mean, I knew Steve Riley before he joined LA Guns when he was in Wasp. So I don't have anything against anybody. It was a lot of fun, but there was a lot of tension and a lot of crossed lines, because some people wanted to be a star at any cost, and some people were loyal. And
Surprising, because I mean, well, obviously, I just saw the Riley's Guns not that long ago at Lincoln's son, and Kelly was obviously he's in the band there. Got to hang out with him, but I thought in the beginning I knew he wasn't the drummer on the album, but it makes sense because the albums, the first one and the second one, totally different albums. The songs
yeah,
to me are so different. It's but at the time, a lot of bands were sounding. Their first album was sounding totally different than their second one. I mean, Faster Pussycats at first and second, night and day difference. So it didn't seem too much out in at the time, because all the bands that were doing these crazy debuts and these next second albums are huge sounding. But the drumming, thinking back now, the drumming style is like that. But I also remember hearing that Tracy was always the one who wanted Steve in the band, because he wanted Steve as a drummer, wanted Steve as a drummer. And so I always felt in the beginning things were a little bit better. I didn't realize that the dynamic of those two
it
guys.
goes way back. I mean, that incident that I discussed on my YouTube channel, I mean, it was never going to come to blows.
This is a stupid fight just to begin with. I mean, what a waste of time as a musician to even
they're
have
just
that
puffing their
discussion.
chest out. It was, Steve's an Irish guy from Boston. He's all about respect. I understood Steve very well, but like he's like, "Yo, man, my wife's on the bus. You don't watch a porno when my wife's on the bus." And Tracy's like, "Well, this is a rock and roll tour, man. Like, screw you." And Steve wasn't having it. I mean, it would have never been a fight. Steve would have killed Tracy.
Right.
I mean, Tracy couldn't fight his way out of a paper bag, but Steve. So it started back in '88. I mean, it was the tension, and and little by little, because even after I stopped working for LA Guns, I would go back out on the road with them in '89 on Cocked and Loaded. Mick would call me up, and they hated their road manager, and the road manager's horrible. Come out and hang out. You just I wouldn't make any money, but I wouldn't have to pay for anything. I'm like,
Right.
okay. So I would go out for a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks, and hang with those guys. And that whole thing was so, I mean, tractor trailers and stage sets and opening bands, and I'm like, you guys have a gold album. Like, it was too much, too soon, too fast in my eyes. They didn't make any money. They got themselves deeper in the hole with the record company because that tour cost a lot of money to keep on the road. They had 2 opening acts. They had all the staging, the lights, the PA, 2 buses. All that cost money, and you're basing that off of a band that had a gold record. Um, you know, um, I don't think to this day the first LA Guns album has ever gone platinum. I don't think Cocked and Loaded has ever been certified platinum in America. In Japan and stuff, it was different. But
Yeah.
It just they really, and that I put all that down to really, Steve and the new management, and they felt that they needed to be headlining. And I thought on that second album, Cocked and Loaded, they should not have been headlining. They should have been opening for people, selling more merch than the headliner. That's what you want to do. Is you want more, you want to open up for, I don't know, whoever was big at the time, Cinderella, I don't know. You want to open up for somebody that's had a platinum record.
Yep.
And sell more merch and, all that kind of stuff. But they really wanted to go and headline, and I thought that was a bad move. I flew into that first show somewhere in Texas. And I came in through the back of the venue, and I'm like, man, there's 2 buses. There's like 3 trucks. I'm like, what? These guys, we had a 28-inch U-Haul. I mean, it's like, what? How does this warrant this big thing? It didn't. They played. I saw shows on that tour that were half full. The opening bands didn't really bring anybody. Tora and Dangerous Toys. Nothing against them, but they didn't draw really. It was just, and again, they made a lot of bad moves. I thought, once they lost their original manager, they lost the original vision, and then they just wanted to be big. Well, not everybody. A couple of guys in the band wanted to be big, and whatever we have to do, if somebody said, yeah, we're going to, get rid of this guy and this guy. Okay, go ahead. Like, that's kind of the attitude, because let me just put it into context also. Tracy Guns is the Guns and Guns N' Roses. Yep. That's all you got to say. So he was in that shadow of that whole time. So when every interview he did, they wanted to talk about Guns N' Roses. And when that's going on constantly, you just want to be big on your own, and you'll do anything to be big. And that's kind of the attitude. It was like, we're tired of being in the shadow of Guns N' Roses. But I mean, I love LA Guns, but they were no Guns N' Roses. You know what I mean? It's that those 5 guys in Guns N' Roses were a unique combination. You never see that again. It was so special and magical. Those guys were the real deal, like real deal, LA Guns, they weren't street like that. I mean, none of those guys in LA Guns were street. None of them. They were all middle-class kind of people. So, but I saw this kind of develop, and, it's hard to just say why it all happened the way it did. But when you see it, like you brought up that incident on the bus in '88 with Steve and Tracy, day by day by day, you just see it happening. That was
early.
The pulling apart of the gang. Yeah, I mean, they stuck it out because, look, if somebody tells you, yeah, we're gonna have a double platinum record, and you're gonna be all over radio, and just hang in there, you're gonna hang in there until you can't hang in there anymore, because I'll deal with this guy I can't stand in the band, so I can hopefully be big. A lot of bands go through that. I read a lot of books, and it's funny, you did the podcast with Steve Gorman. I just finished reading his book. That guy's book is incredible. Isn't incredible. It? I mean, you want to see what a rock and roll band is like? Read that guy's book. Well, it's always to me, your first and second albums, whoever's on those records, that's what people identify with as the classic version, But
I know, but
LA Guns,
Steve wasn't even on the first one, though. That's the whole thing, the illusion of it not even being on that first one.
Well, his picture was on there, but he didn't play on it. So a lot of people don't know that. So,
I know that.
So, but that's the classic band that Polygram promoted, that they put lots of money into. That was the big machine, promoted those 5 guys. After that, then it was just indie labels and just trying to stay afloat and pay your rent. I mean, and I get that. As a musician, you got to play. But man, there's been I saw some versions of LA Guns over the years that just, I was just like disappointed. What is this? Like,
The
there's
hardcore
5
version
people
was
in
the
the.
worst. The
That
hardcore
was
version was the
horrible.
worst.
Whatever
That
that
was
was
where
called.
American Hardcore, I think that is the album. That was where I'm like, I can't. That's where I stopped going, and eventually I went back to listen to some, with the years. But that was the album. That was it for me. I was like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. These guys. That was just not even.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Um,
just chasing trends. Tracy
right.
was always like that. He was always somebody that whatever was going to be, whatever was hot, he wanted to be that. I mean, he wanted to
Brides of
be, Jimi
Destruction is what
Hendrix.
happened to that. You know, he quit. He quit to do
Yeah,
Brides, and that's I think probably the beginning of the big legal disputes of the name because that's he kept walking after that, and then I think he had legal gentleman, and then he did something else for a while, and he kept popping in and out. And you get Steve in the background doing the business, and
yeah,
and it
Tracy.
evolved
Yeah,
into that.
not cool. I mean, I mean, you know, uh, I remember when he wanted to be John Frusciante from the Chili Peppers. He cut his hair and he started wearing, crazy shorts. And I mean, so whatever was the trend is where he went, which is, like I said earlier, the to me the iconic LA Guns is that image on the back of the first album. That to me is what LA Guns is. But again, that's my opinion. But yeah, I mean, I understand, chasing a trend to try to stay afloat and appease the record company or whatever you have to do. But I don't know. It's the same thing of, Tommy Lee with cornrows in his hair, trying to be a hip hop guy. I mean, it's just like, do you ever see the Stones or any of those iconic bands, try to be anything other than what they were, AC/DC, or I mean, you could go on and on and on.
Yeah,
They didn't chase anything; they just were. And I'm not saying that to stay afloat, LA Guns should have not progressed, but they really went to extremes sometimes. To me, like American Hardcore, not a
that
hardcore
was
band.
no. You know,
Sex,
I do
booze,
have to
and
say, like,
tattoos.
yeah, well, at this point, I gotta say, I think of all the different watered versions since the original, I do think the last couple albums of this LA Guns are their strongest in a long time, and Riley's version, I like those two. I like the album they did and the single. They are at least
Yeah,
it's different because Riley's
I mean,
version, I like it. I like the song. Very interesting. It's very different. It's a different version of LA Guns sound, but it still feels like it's got that dirty, honest feeling.
yeah, that's their whole MO is to make Riley's version is to make records that sound like what LA Guns fans expect rather than
Right.
to do something different. Look, I just, I'm happy that they're all out there and still doing it. I mean, Tracy and Steve, I mean, Tracy and Phil being together
So
are, those two. I mean, it's good for the brand. Um, but you got to remember something. LA Guns never had hit songs. And if you don't have hit songs, it's tough to exist. Ballad of Jane was a song Tracy fought and fought and fought to keep off that record. Tracy said he was going to quit the band if Ballad of Jane was on Cocked and Loaded. And that was a top 40 hit. He literally said, I'm quitting. I'm not going to be in a band with that record, that song on that
I didn't
record.
know that. That's incredible.
Yeah. So, it's just, what you have to have a hit song. Motley Crue had hit songs, radio songs that people still sing.
Dr. Feelgood came out
Nothing.
nice and polished. It's a great
Yeah,
time
I
for
mean,
them.
nothing on the first LA Guns album was on the radio, really. Second album, Rip and Tear, got a little bit of rock radio play, and then Ballad of Jane
Never
was a
enough.
top 40 hit for like a week. It
Didn't
was in
Never
the
Enough do
top
okay
40.
though?
What's that?
What about Never Enough? That did okay, right? A little bit of
Never
MTV
enough
play.
to. Yeah, well, again, MTV played the videos, but as far as radio, they didn't get a lot of radio play. Ballad of Jane got the most radio play, but it hit the top 40 and then quickly dropped again. They didn't have the legs.
Okay.
MTV, yes, MTV helped sell records for them. Never Enough was a big video on MTV. Ballad of Jane was a big video on MTV. Rip and Tear was the first video, kind of set the record up. But they didn't have hits, and if you don't have hits, I mean, it's you can't survive. To me, look at bands like I don't know, some of these old new wave bands had one big hit, but everybody knows it because it's in the the paper towel commercial. Do you know what I mean? So it's like they're able to go and tour and do casinos and stuff and make good money because they have a hit song that you still hear on oldies radio. So LA Guns never had that. They weren't they tried to be that on Hollywood Vampires. Really, they tried to be, shift to be more of like a rock band with radio songs.
There's a couple good songs on there. I think there's a couple good ones on there.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad album, but it was a little, that's 91. And then Nirvana came out in 91, and there you go. So it just
Vicious Cycle.
When your shirts say sex, booze, and tattoo. What's that?
Yeah, I like the one after that. Was it Vicious Cycle or Circle? I like that
Vicious,
one.
So that's an interesting record.
That was the one. That one I liked. I thought, okay, we got something going on. And that was after that. Then they fell apart again, and then American Hardcore sometime around that time, and it was just too much. That's when it's like potential, and then it's the last good shot.
Well, the band by Vicious Circle, the band had kind of broken up by that point. Tracy had left, and Tracy had a big falling out with Phil, and then Tracy left. So basically, Polygram said, "Look, you owe us another record." So that Vicious Circle album was written and put together by Phil Lewis, Kelly Nichols, and Mick Cripps. Those three guys. Steve had been fired. Tracy quit. So they had to do this album. So if you really look at the credits on that album, they brought in a lot of musicians. They brought in Myron Grumbacher plays drums on some stuff. They brought in different drummers. They brought in different guitarists. They had a lot of different people were on that record. At the very end, Polygram found out Tracy wasn't in the band and said, well, he's got to be in the band for this record. We won't accept it if he's not. So they had to ask Tracy to come back. He played on a couple of things on Vicious Circle. Then they went out on the road. I think they played like CBGB type places at the time. And, just the record was pretty good, but didn't go anywhere. But Tracy and Steve Riley had really nothing to do with that album. That was all Phil and Kelly and Mick. That was all that was left of LA Guns.
That's interesting. Of all the two people to not have in the band, is those two guys that are the most dynamically opposed to each other at times. Had them both out, and the other three guys who are in. It's pretty interesting. I mean, Mick's always been quieter too in the background. Phil obviously has had his own issues with the guys, but Kelly and Mick are always the quieter ones.
Yeah, Mick is the diplomat. I mean, Mick always rides down the middle. He doesn't take a side. Mick was always very focused. Mick was a very big part of the band, even getting a record deal in the beginning. I mean, nothing went on with that band without Mick giving his okay, pretty much. He was very important in the band in that sense. And, Mick doesn't get enough credit, but Mick was a big part of LA Guns the whole beginning days. By the time Vicious Circle came around, I mean, he was already, he wanted nothing to do with it. Yeah. I mean, he did the Burning Retina record. Mick's been the most prolific, putting out multiple records with multiple projects. I mean, over the years, Burning Retina and the Brutalists, and Mick is really into playing. I was out in LA recently. I saw him. He plays every Friday at this British pub in LA. And they do all covers, like pub rock, 50s, 60s type stuff.
That's cool.
Clem Burke from Blondie plays drums a lot with them out there. And but he does it because he likes to play, but he just doesn't want any of the drama. He hates to be associated with LA Guns. He hates to be associated with LA Guns because of what it's become. It's embarrassing at times to him. So he kind of stays in the back.
I don't blame him.
And Kelly didn't do anything for a long time. Kelly was a dad for 18 years.
18 years, yeah.
That, and after his, and then his daughter, got old enough to go to college, and that's when he kind of started hooking up with Steve again.
This is fantastic. I've learned a lot of stuff I didn't know about it. I've done a lot of different stuff in the days. I never learned as much. But I want people to go to your YouTube page. I'll have all the links underneath this on the podcast and on the YouTube show. Your Instagram. Do you have a Facebook page? I just go to your Instagram and your YouTube page. Do you have a?
Yeah, no Facebook. If you get to my Instagram, there's links there to my YouTube page,
Yeah.
because it's hard to find these pages sometimes, if you just type in a name, because multiple people can have the same name. So get to my Instagram, 1985 Road Dog. There's a link there to my YouTube channel with all my videos. But yeah, I mean, I the more the merrier, man. If people dig it,
Yeah.
I'm happy.
And people need to do both, because here's the thing: you don't. It's not actually a copy of. It's they go together like a companion piece, because you're showing photos of one, but on YouTube you're talking about and telling the stories. You're not getting like duplicate media into your feeds for people. So you're getting Instagram pictures of pictures you've never seen before, with a little blurb of the main story, and then you go to YouTube and you're hearing a good story that you've never heard before from somebody that was actually there and remembers it. You're not going to get that a lot of
Yeah.
places nowadays.
Well, I mean, I just happen to have a lot of photos. I was always taking pictures. Um, I I mean, I have so many, and there's a lot I can't post, but there's, yeah. I started out with the Instagram channel, and then people would ask me questions about the photos, like, "Hey, what was the story behind this?" So then I just started. I said, "Well, I'll just start telling stories on YouTube," and that's kind of how it all happened. The story behind the photo, kind of thing. But Yeah, the Instagram channel is doing well, and I'm pretty encouraged, and people seem to be digging it. Um, People always want me to talk about things that are like, I do have a line I draw. Like you know, I just don't talk about just anything. I mean, there's stuff
Oh,
that's gone down that I won't talk about. But that's
those are
just down
interesting
to
stories you're sharing. You don't. You want to be a human. There's a morality. There's a whole point where it's just trash talk, and there's a point just showing about the business of the part of the band, the dynamic, the public version that's entertaining or it's interesting as a fan of the band. How it got to hear, why the album sounded like this, what you really heard, because there was no internet back then. There was no real interviews. That's interesting. But yeah, you don't need to air everything. Um,
Well, yeah, that was the whole impetus with the Instagram with my photos, was because I always say, if there's social media existed back then, there would be no need for me to post any of these photos, because it'd be all over my social media. So the fact that there was no social media, the photos become more valuable, because here's a photo, I have the picture. Some of them I still have
yep.
negatives, and it's just like, well, this is it right here. It's like, so it's fun for fans to see these photos, because it's not like something you would have seen in a magazine.
Yeah.
And they're all mine. Every pretty much 99% of all the photos on my Instagram are my photos. Um, so it's I'm just glad people dig it. Some people are very cool, and I correspond with people. They ask me questions, and hey, look, man, I know what it was like to be a fan when I was a crazy
Yeah.
Kiss fan in the '70s. Man, to be able to talk to somebody that worked with the band, I would have been like over the moon. So I remember that stuff, and I'm like,
Yeah.
you're talking to some 18-year-old kid that lives in South America. He's just so
Yeah.
excited. And I understand that.
Well, you've actually filled a lot of things in for me, and I read a lot of books and do a lot of, a lot of history. So I appreciate just hearing, your stories and today talking. I learned some things, which is really good. For me, you've talked in your channel, and I want to end. I let people keep an eye out, or an ear out rather, that you are going to do a book. I'm sure you'll post the
Yes.
information on your social media, so people should be aware of it. Enjoy this as a precursor, even more stuff that Mike has in his canon to put out there. It's just it
Yeah.
should be the iceberg.
My book has been finished for a while. I was trying to go the regular route of publishing, and going with somebody that could also market it and promote it. And
Hmm.
it's just not, I've been hitting a brick wall. So I'm going to self-publish, it looks like. And,
Hmm.
but yes, all that will be on my Instagram. I'll have posts about, when it's available. And, the book covers my life in music, first as a fan, and then somebody that eventually started working in the business. So it covers, mid '70s to like mid '90s. It's my story of my time working in music, and how I got to where I got and how it all happened. And I start off the book with a little prologue, like who am I? I'm nobody famous, but I was lucky enough to be able to live a lifestyle that put me in the middle of a lot of big cultural changes in music and just in life in general. So it's a story of a time and a place. It's a time capsule, and people dig it, great. If they don't, whatever. I mean, it's my story. I wanted it out there, so I've gotten I've gotten older. I've gotten very big on preserving and leaving behind stories and information. We could be also passing down family stuff to younger kids in the family and stories and stuff, because after 2 or 3 generations, man, it all washes away. So
Yeah.
if you don't write it down or have a video or something so people can use it as information and reference one day, it'll just disappear. That's also part of the drive. Is I want people to be able to go back and watch those YouTube videos, years from now, and they get brought back to a time that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. I want to thank you. This has been awesome. I appreciate it. And I want people to go and click and subscribe to both the sites. You will definitely get your enjoyment on and learn a lot. So thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it. Anybody that asks me, I always do it, and I appreciate you wanting to help me. And I hope that people respond favorably to the chapter here on your channel.